The New Orleans air, thick and sweet with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and yesterday's rain, hung heavy in Charlie Washington's Garden District apartment. It was 5 a.m. The sun hadn't yet begun to bleed over the Mississippi, but she was wide awake, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It wasn't the familiar adrenaline of a pre-dawn raid, or the tense silence before a high-risk warrant service. This was something else entirely, a dizzying cocktail of joy and a terrifying, unnameable dread. Today was her wedding day. Her detective's eyes, trained to scan for threats and inconsistencies, traced the silhouette of the wedding dress hanging on her closet door. It was ivory lace, elegant and timeless, a stark contrast to the utilitarian black and gray that dominated the rest of her wardrobe. Adam had laughed when she'd chosen it, his voice a warm baritone that always managed to soothe the jagged edges of her world. "Even on our wedding day, Detective Washington," he'd teased, "you're all business, classic, formidable, no nonsense." Thinking of him brought a smile, but it was a fragile thing, easily broken. Adam Delacroix, the name itself felt like old money and whispered power, a world away from her own upbringing in the 7th Ward. He was a handsome, charismatic businessman, heir to a Louisiana shipping fortune, and the man who had somehow dismantled the fortress she'd built around her heart. They'd met during a fraud investigation tied to one of his family's subsidiaries. She'd been professional, guarded, he'd been persistent, charming, and seemingly colorblind, a rarity in the circles he moved in. He said he loved her for her strength, her mind, her refusal to be anything but herself. For 3 years, she'd allowed herself to believe it, but the dread lingered. For the past few weeks, a subtle dissonance had crept into their perfect harmony. Adam had become more secretive, his phone always angled away from her, his late nights at the office more frequent. He'd explained it away as pressure from a new merger, his voice smooth and reassuring. But Charlie's instincts, the ones that had kept her alive on the streets of New Orleans, were screaming. A cop knows the anatomy of a lie. The slight hesitation before an answer, the over-detailed explanation, the flicker of something unreadable in the eyes. She'd seen it all from Adam. A sharp knock at the door jolted her. She threw on a silk robe and opened it to find her best friend, Kesha, beaming, a massive makeup case in one hand and a bag from Café du Monde in the other. "Morning, bride-to-be," Kesha breezed in, the scent of beignets and chicory coffee filling the apartment. "No last-minute cold feet, I hope? Because I did not spend 4 hours steaming this veil for you to make a run for it." Charlie forced a laugh. "Never, just wedding day jitters." Kesha, who had known her since they were kids navigating the same tough neighborhood schools, narrowed her eyes. She was a top stylist in the city and could read a person's tells better than a polygraph. "Jitters, or Adam is acting weird again jitters?" she asked, setting up her professional lighting ring by the vanity mirror. "He's just stressed," Charlie said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. They fell into an easy rhythm, the kind forged over 2 decades of friendship. They talked about their high school prom, the time Charlie had to arrest a man dressed as a giant crawfish on Bourbon Street, their dreams for the future. Kesha's skillful hands worked their magic, blending foundation, defining Charlie's high cheekbones, creating a smoky eye that was both alluring and commanding. For a moment, looking in the mirror, Charlie saw not the detective, but the bride, a woman on the precipice of happiness. "You know, his mother still looks at you like you're the hired help," Kesha said softly, applying a final dusting of powder. The comment hung in the air, sharp and true. Eleanor Delacroix, the family matriarch, had never approved. She cloaked her racism in the silken language of Southern high society, with backhanded compliments about how articulate Charlie was, or how impressively she had overcome her circumstances. To Eleanor, Charlie wasn't a decorated detective. She was a blemish on the pristine Delacroix family tree. "She'll come around," Charlie murmured, though she didn't believe it. "Adam needs to stand up to her more," Kesha insisted. "A man who can't defend you to his mother." She trailed off, not wanting to spoil the day. At 8:45 a.m., with her hair pinned into an intricate updo, Charlie's phone buzzed on the vanity. A text from an unknown number. Her cop senses went on high alert. Scams, wrong numbers, they happened all the time. But this felt different. "Who is it?" Kesha asked, noticing the sudden tension in Charlie's shoulders. Charlie's thumb hovered over the screen before tapping it open. There was no text, no picture, just a single unlabeled audio file. She felt a cold knot form in her stomach. This was a deliberate act, anonymous, untraceable, designed for maximum impact. She pressed play, holding the phone to her ear. The audio was clear, professionally recorded. A woman's voice, soft and laced with an intimacy that made Charlie's blood run cold, whispered, "He said if it's a boy, we'll name him Thomas, after his grandfather. Our little Tommy. He promised he'd tell you after the merger was complete. Don't marry a liar, detective. He belongs to us now." The world tilted on its axis. Every sound in the room, the hum of the air conditioner, the distant wail of a siren, Kesha's gentle humming, faded into a deafening roar. It wasn't just the words. It was the possessiveness in us, the casual mention of a name, Adam's beloved grandfather's name, and the final, chilling address, detective. This wasn't a random prank. This was a targeted strike, aimed directly at the heart of her identity, her love, and her profession. The beautiful, fragile image of the bride in the mirror shattered, and in its place was the cold, hard face of a woman who had just become the lead detective in the investigation of her own life's destruction. The silence in the room was a physical weight, pressing down on Charlie's chest. Kesha saw the blood drain from her friend's face and rushed to her side. "Charlie, what is it? What did you hear?" Without a word, Charlie held out the phone. Kesha listened, her own expression shifting from concern to pure, unadulterated fury. "That son of a bitch!" she breathed, her voice a low hiss. "That lying, cheating son of a bitch. We're calling this off, right now." But Charlie didn't move. Her mind, no longer a bride's but a detective's, was racing, processing, analyzing. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. The audio file was a weapon, but a crude one. No name, no context beyond the devastatingly intimate details. It was designed to provoke a hysterical reaction, to make her look like a crazy, jealous woman. The optics, as they say in her line of work, would be terrible. If she canceled the wedding based on an anonymous recording, the powerful Delacroix family would paint her as unstable, unworthy. She'd be the hysterical black woman who flew off the handle, ruining their perfect son's perfect day. They would win. "No," Charlie said, her voice eerily calm. "We're not calling it off." Kesha stared at her, bewildered. "Are you insane? You can't marry him after this?" "I'm not going to marry him," Charlie clarified, a cold fire igniting in her eyes. "I'm going to make him answer for it, in front of everyone, in front of his perfect judgmental mother and all his high society friends." This was no longer a wedding. It was an interrogation. The French Quarter courtyard was no longer a venue. It was her stage. Her fingers, now steady, moved with purpose. She forwarded the audio file to her secure, cloud-based evidence locker, a backup system she used for sensitive cases. Then she took a tiny, thumbnail-sized audio recorder, a piece of personal surveillance gear she kept for emergencies, and carefully tucked it into the dense foliage of her bridal bouquet. A bride's bouquet is often thrown away. This one would be evidence. Then she did the last thing Kesha expected. She picked up the phone and called Adam. He answered on the second ring, his voice oozing charm. "My beautiful bride. Breaking the rules, are we? It's bad luck to talk before the ceremony." "Adam, I need you to be honest with me," Charlie said, her tone level, professional. She was using her interrogation voice, calm, non-accusatory, designed to lull a suspect into a false sense of security. "I'd just received a recording. A woman. She said you promised to name your son Thomas." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. It stretched for 3, 4, 5 seconds. In police work, that's an eternity. It's the space where a lie is born. Finally, he laughed, but it was a brittle, sharp sound. "Oh, honey, is that what this is about? You have no idea the kind of scum you put away. I've been getting threats for weeks, people trying to extort the family. They must have dug up some dirt, found out my grandfather's name. They're trying to ruin our day, Charlie. Don't let them." It was a masterful performance. He deflected, painted himself as a victim, and turned the blame back onto her profession. He was leveraging her own life's work against her. It was brilliant, and it was despicable. "So, you're saying you have no idea who this woman is?" Charlie pressed, keeping her voice even. Of course not. I love you. You're the only woman in my life. Look, we can have security deal with this after the ceremony. Just get to the altar. Look me in the eye when we say our vows, and you'll know that none of this trash matters. Our love is stronger than their hate, okay? Our love is stronger than their hate. He was framing it as a them versus us battle, a classic manipulation tactic. He was good. Terrifyingly good. Okay, Adam, she said softly. I'll see you at the altar. She hung up. Kesha was looking at her, a mixture of horror and awe on her face. You're really going through with this? I am, Charlie said, standing up and looking at her reflection. The woman staring back was a stranger, a bride in ivory lace with the eyes of a predator. He wants me to look him in the eye? I will. He wants vows? He'll get them. He thinks he can lie his way out of this, right up to the I do. He's underestimated me. They all have. She picked up the bouquet, the hidden recorder nestled within the white roses and eucalyptus leaves, feeling as heavy and as potent as her service weapon. She adjusted the delicate veil over her face. It felt less like a bridal accessory and more like a tactical screen, hiding her true intentions. Kesha, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. When we get there, I need you to do something for me. My partner Derek will be there. He's in the second row, aisle seat. When the time comes, I need you to make sure he gets this bouquet. Kesha's eyes widened in understanding. This wasn't just about public humiliation. This was about building a case. Charlie wasn't just a woman scorned. She was a detective on the job, and her own wedding was now an active crime scene. The seed of doubt had been planted, and Charlie was about to make sure it bloomed into a full, ugly, and undeniable truth for the entire world to see. The ride to the French Quarter was a blur of wrought iron balconies and vibrant Creole townhouses. The air, thick with the promise of a sweltering Louisiana afternoon, did little to warm the ice that had formed in Charlie's veins. She sat perfectly still in the back of the vintage Rolls-Royce Adam had hired, a perfect porcelain doll of a bride, her hands clutching the bouquet that held her secret. The venue was a place called the Maison de la Lune, a historic courtyard hidden away from the bacchanalia of Bourbon Street. It was absurdly beautiful, a gilded cage of crumbling brick, lush ferns, and a fountain that trickled water with a serene, mocking calm. This was Adam's world, a world of performative elegance and inherited status, and today, Charlie was meant to be his crowning achievement, the tough, beautiful, urban detective he had tamed. The guests were already mingling, sipping champagne under the shade of magnolia trees. Charlie could see them from the car, Adam's friends from the Metairie Country Club, his business associates with their plastic smiles, and, of course, the Delacroix clan. They were a formidable unit, led by the family matriarch, Eleanor. Dressed in a Chanel suit the color of cold cash, Eleanor watched the proceedings with the imperious gaze of a queen surveying her court. When Charlie stepped out of the car, a polite ripple of applause went through the crowd. Adam, looking impossibly handsome in a custom-tailored linen suit, rushed to her side. He took her hand, his own feeling slick and clammy. "You're breathtaking," he whispered, his eyes scanning her face. Not with love, but with a flicker of nervous assessment. He was checking to see if his lies had held. "You look nervous, Adam," Charlie said, her voice a soft purr. She watched a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. Before he could answer, Eleanor Delacroix glided towards them. She didn't hug Charlie. She simply took her by the shoulders, her perfectly manicured nails pressing just a little too hard. "Charlotte, my dear," she said, her voice as smooth and sweet as poisoned honey. "The dress is quite lovely, so simple. You've truly come so far. It must all be quite overwhelming for you." The insult was a masterpiece of passive aggression. Simple, as in unsophisticated. Come so far, as in from the gutter. Overwhelming, as in you don't belong here. It was the same veiled racism Charlie had endured for 3 years, the constant reminder that, to them, she would always be an outsider, a charity case. Charlie met the older woman's gaze and gave her a brilliant, icy smile. "Not at all, Eleanor. In my line of work, I deal with far more sophisticated criminals than this. I'm perfectly at ease." Eleanor's own smile tightened. Point to Charlie. Her partner, Detective Derek Williams, caught her eye from across the courtyard. He gave her a thumbs up and a wide, genuine grin. Derek was more than a partner. He was family. He was one of the few people who understood the pressure she was under, both as a cop and as a black woman marrying into the De La Croix dynasty. He'd once told her, "Just make sure he's worth the hell his family's gonna put you through." Today she would find out. The wedding coordinator, a flustered woman with a clipboard, began ushering guests to their seats. The string quartet started playing a soft, romantic melody that sounded, to Charlie's ears, like a funeral dirge. Her father, a proud, quiet man who'd worked the New Orleans docks for 40 years, came to walk her down the aisle. "You okay, baby girl?" he whispered, seeing the tension in her jaw. "It's not too late to run. I've got the car started." She squeezed his arm. "I'm not running, Daddy. I'm fighting." As they stood at the entrance to the aisle, a path strewn with white rose petals, Charlie's eyes did a final, systematic sweep of the crowd. It was a habit, a cop's instinct to clock every face, every exit, every potential threat. And then she saw her. Seated in the very last row, tucked away in the shadows of a stone archway, was a young black woman. She was beautiful, with a quiet strength in her posture, and she was visibly, undeniably pregnant. She wore a simple blue dress that did nothing to hide the swell of her belly. She wasn't crying or making a scene. She was just sitting there, watching, her expression a mixture of sorrow and resolve. Time seemed to stop. The music, the murmuring guests, the trickling fountain, it all faded away. It was her, the voice from the audio file, the woman carrying the child who was supposed to be named Thomas. Their eyes met across the courtyard, a silent, profound connection passing between them. In that instant, Charlie understood. This woman wasn't a malicious homewrecker. She was another victim, another woman who had been lied to, another pawn in Adam's game. She had come here not to create chaos, but to bear witness to the truth. The coordinator gave Charlie a gentle nudge. "It's time." Charlie took a deep breath, the scent of magnolias and betrayal filling her lungs. Her father's arm was a steady anchor in a world that was about to shatter. She took her first step down the aisle, not towards a new life with the man she loved, but towards a final, public reckoning with the man who had destroyed her. Every eye was on the bride in white, but her gaze was fixed on the pregnant woman in blue, the silent keeper of a truth that was about to explode. Each step down that petal-strewn aisle was a lifetime. The faces of the guests blurred into a collage of polite smiles and curious glances. Charlie saw her colleagues from the NOPD, Captain Foster, Sergeant Miller, and her partner Derek, whose smile had now been replaced by a frown of concern. He knew her too well. He could see the storm gathering behind her eyes. She saw her mother, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, blissfully unaware. And at the end of the aisle, she saw Adam, his smile looking more like a pained grimace as he watched her approach. She was a predator stalking its prey. Halfway to the altar, she stopped. The music faltered. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Her father looked at her, his brow furrowed. "Charlie, what's wrong?" Adam took a step forward, his voice tight with forced concern. "Honey, are you okay?" Charlie ignored them all. She let go of her father's arm, and her gaze, cold and deliberate, swept past Adam to the last row. She raised her hand, not in a wave, but with the authority of a detective pointing out a suspect in a lineup. "Her!" Charlie's voice rang out, clear and sharp, cutting through the stunned silence. "Adam, tell me who that woman is." Every head in the courtyard swiveled. The spotlight of 100 pairs of eyes fell on the pregnant woman in the back row, who sat frozen, exposed. Adam turned white as a sheet. He looked from Charlie to the woman, then back again, his face a mask of pure panic. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, his voice cracking. "She must be a tourist who wandered in. Security! Don't you dare lie to me." Charlie's voice dropped to a lethal whisper that still carried across the yard. "Not here, not today." The pregnant woman, seeing there was no turning back, rose slowly to her feet. She moved with a quiet grace, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. She walked down the aisle from the opposite end, a mirror image of the bride, her simple blue dress a stark contrast to Charlie's elaborate ivory gown. They were two women from two different worlds, brought together by the same man's deceit. She stopped a few feet from the altar, her eyes full of a sorrow that seemed too deep for her years. "My name is Amara Jones," she said, her voice steady and clear, "and I'm here because Adam made me a promise." "This is insane!" Adam shouted, his composure shattering. "I've never seen this woman before in my life. She's crazy. Someone get her out of here." Amara just shook her head sadly. "Will you deny our son too, Adam? The son you wanted to name Thomas?" The name hit the crowd like a physical blow. A collective gasp went through the guests. Charlie saw her mother's hand fly to her mouth. Her father's face hardened with rage. Derek was already halfway out of his seat, his cop instincts on full alert. This was the moment, the breaking point. But the final push didn't come from Adam or Amara. It came from the queen herself. Eleanor de la Croix, her face a mask of cold fury, strode to the front. She didn't address Amara, she didn't even look at her. She walked directly to Charlie, getting so close that Charlie could smell the expensive cloying perfume she wore. "This is what happens," Eleanor hissed. Her voice a venomous whisper meant only for Charlie's ears, but dripping with a hatred that felt ancient and profound. "This is the drama you people bring with you. You thought you could marry into this family?" She let out a short, ugly laugh. "My son has his appetites, but he knows his duty. Now, be a good girl. I'll write you a check. Enough to make this whole embarrassing episode disappear. Take the money and go back to wherever it is you came from. You people, your drama. Go back to where you came from." It was all there. Every unspoken insult, every condescending glance, every thinly veiled racist remark from the past 3 years, all distilled into one raw, hateful moment. She wasn't a bride, a detective, or even a woman. To Eleanor, she was a thing to be bought and discarded, a problem to be paid off. Adam's lies had been the fuel, but his mother's words were the match. Something inside Charlie, a dam that had been holding back years of anger, frustration, and humiliation, finally broke. The world narrowed to a single point of searing, white-hot rage. The carefully constructed plan, the interrogation, the public shaming, it all dissolved. She looked past Eleanor, her eyes locking onto Adam, who was standing there, silent, letting his mother fight his battle for him. He was weak, a coward, a parasite who had tried to feed off her strength, her love, her very identity. Slowly, deliberately, she turned to Kesha, who was standing nearby, her face pale with horror. Charlie held out the bouquet. "For Derek," she mouthed silently. Kesha, understanding the gravity of the command, took it, her hands trembling. Charlie then turned back to face her destiny. The serene courtyard, the beautiful flowers, the stunned faces of the guests. It all faded into the background. There was only the lie, the betrayal, and the blinding, cleansing fire of her rage. The altar of their wedding had become an altar of judgment, and the verdict was about to be delivered. The rage that consumed Charlie was a physical force, a supernova exploding behind her eyes. It obliterated all thought, all reason, all training. There was only the raw, primal scream of a soul that had been pushed past its breaking point. Her hand moved with a speed and precision honed by years on the firing range. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was muscle memory, an instinct unleashed. Her fingers found the small, pearl-inlaid clutch purse that dangled from her wrist, a bridal accessory Adam had called the perfect finishing touch. Inside, nestled next to a tube of lipstick and a single tissue, was her off-duty by .380 semi-automatic pistol, her backup piece, her last resort. Derek saw the movement. He saw the shift in her posture, the terrifying emptiness in her eyes. "Charlie, no!" he roared, lunging forward from the second row. But he was too late. The click of the purse's clasp was lost in the stunned silence, but the sight of the small black pistol appearing in the bride's hand was unmistakable. It looked alien and obscene against the delicate ivory lace of her dress. Adam's eyes widened in disbelief, then terror. He took a clumsy step backward, tripping over a floral arrangement. "Charlotte, please." Her arm extended, steady as a rock. She looked down the barrel of the gun at the man she was supposed to promise to love and cherish, in sickness and in health. He had made her sick. He had broken her health. One shot. The sound was a deafening crack that shattered the serene afternoon, sending a flock of pigeons scattering into the sky. It echoed off the old brick walls, a sound of finality. Adam crumpled to the ground, a crimson flower blooming on the crisp white of his linen suit. He didn't cry out. He just fell, a puppet with its strings cut. For a single horrifying beat, the entire courtyard was frozen in a tableau of shock. Then, chaos erupted. Screams tore through the air. Guests scrambled, knocking over chairs and champagne glasses. Eleanor de la Croix let out a shrill, piercing shriek, while Amara Jones stood rooted to the spot, her hands pressed against her pregnant belly in silent horror. In that maelstrom of panic, Charlie's training kicked in, a cold wave of logic dousing the fire of her rage. She wasn't a bride anymore. She was a fugitive, escape and evade. She didn't run blindly. Her mind, now a tactical computer, assessed the scene. The main entrance was blocked by the terrified mob. The service alley, a potential bottleneck. She needed a distraction. With a powerful shove, she sent a 3-tiered wedding cake, a monument of fondant and buttercream, crashing to the ground. It exploded in a shower of white, creating a slippery, chaotic barrier. People screamed and fell, adding to the confusion. This was her window. She turned and sprinted, not towards the main gate, but towards a low, wrought iron fence at the back of the courtyard, half hidden by overgrown bougainvillea. As she ran, she saw Kesha, her face a mask of terror, clutching the bouquet. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Kesha understood. She turned and made a beeline for Derek, who was fighting his way through the panicked crowd, his hand on his own holstered weapon. The evidence was being passed. The chain of custody had begun. Charlie reached the fence. Her wedding dress, a symbol of a life that no longer existed, was now a liability, its long train catching on everything. With a guttural cry of frustration, she gathered the expensive fabric in one hand and ripped it from the waist down, tearing the beautiful lace with a sound like a final, ragged sob. Freed from its constraints, she vaulted over the fence with an athlete's grace, landing in the narrow, cobblestoned alley behind the venue. She ran. Her satin heels, impossible for a pursuit, were kicked off, and she ran barefoot on the hot, dirty stones of the French Quarter. She was a surreal vision, a bride in a tattered, ruined gown, a gun clutched in her hand, her face a blank mask of shock. Tourists stopped and stared, their phones coming out to capture the bizarre spectacle. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away. Away from the screams, away from Adam's fallen body, away from the woman she had just become. The sirens began to wail in the distance, a familiar sound that now signaled not the arrival of help, but the beginning of the hunt. They were coming for her, her brothers and sisters in blue, her partner, her friends. She was no longer Detective Charlotte Washington of the NOPD. She was a suspect, a shooter, a bride on the run, a ghost in white fleeing the ruins of her own making, with the entire weight of the city's law enforcement about to come crashing down upon her. Within minutes, the Maison de la Lune courtyard was no longer a wedding venue. It was a major crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off the beautiful, blood-stained space. The string quartet's abandoned instruments lay silent, a stark contrast to the cacophony of police radios, shouting officers, and the sobbing of traumatized guests. Captain Maria Foster of the NOPD's 1st District stood in the center of the chaos, her face a grim, unreadable mask. One of her best detectives had just committed a violent felony in front of 100 witnesses, including half a dozen cops. It was a nightmare scenario, a PR disaster of epic proportions, and a personal tragedy that hit her like a punch to the gut. "Foster, what the hell is going on?" The voice belonged to Deputy Chief Matthews, bellowing through her radio. "The mayor's office is calling. The Delacroix family is calling. They want her head on a platter. What's your status?" "The scene is secure, Chief. Victim is en route to University Medical Center. Critical, but alive. The suspect, Detective Washington, fled the scene." "We have a citywide bolo out," she replied, her voice clipped and professional, betraying none of the turmoil she felt. Derek Williams approached her, his face pale, his uniform disheveled. In his hands he held the bridal bouquet. "Captain," he said, his voice low, "Kesha, the maid of honor, she gave this to me. She said Charlie told her to." Foster's eyes narrowed. "Bag it," she ordered. "Tag it as evidence. What's on your mind, Detective?" "This wasn't a snap, Captain." "Not entirely," Derek said, his mind racing. "It was planned. Maybe not the shooting, but the exposure. Why tell her to give me the bouquet? There's something in it, or on it. She was thinking like a cop, right up until—" He trailed off, unable to say the words. The pressure from above was immense. The Delacroix family, with their vast wealth and political connections, were pulling every string they had. Their lawyers were already on scene, spinning a narrative to the hovering news crews. A violent, unstable woman, a gold digger who flew into a jealous rage when her meal ticket was threatened. They were painting Charlie as the aggressor, the predator, conveniently omitting the context of Adam's infidelity and their own family's bigotry. The subtle racism that had simmered for years was now boiling over into a public character assassination. A patrol officer rushed up. "Captain, we've got a hit." A tourist's photo shows the suspect getting into a gray sedan registered to a Shell Corp 2 blocks from here. It's one of the cars from our undercover motor pool. Foster cursed under her breath. Of course. Charlie knew their procedures. She had a go bag, a bug-out vehicle. She had been preparing for an emergency, just not this one. "Get me GPS on that vehicle now," Foster commanded. The chase was on. Units across the city converged on the signal, which was heading north on I-10, out of the city towards Lake Pontchartrain. It was a classic escape route. The Causeway Bridge, miles of open water. It was a straight shot to the North Shore, to anonymity. Helicopters were scrambled. State police were notified. The hunt for the runaway bride shooter, as the media had already dubbed her, was in full swing. Derek, riding with Foster, watched the GPS dot move steadily up the interstate. It felt deeply wrong, hunting one of their own. Hunting Charlie. "She's fast," Foster noted grimly as their cruiser sped through traffic. "She's not panicking, she's driving like she's on a mission." The GPS signal led them to an abandoned boat launch on the south shore of the massive lake. The salt-laced wind whipped across the gray water as a half-dozen police cars skidded to a halt. And there it was. The gray sedan, parked neatly by the water's edge, its engine cold. SWAT officers, guns drawn, approached cautiously. "Clear!" one of them yelled after a few tense moments. Foster and Derek rushed to the vehicle. The driver's side door was ajar. Inside, the car was empty. On the passenger seat, a single poignant piece of evidence lay starkly against the dark upholstery, a torn piece of ivory lace from a wedding dress. Derek's heart sank. "It's a decoy," he said, the realization dawning on him. "She knew we'd track the car. She led us on a wild goose chase, bought herself time." How much time? An hour, 2? In a city like New Orleans, with its labyrinthine streets and endless hiding places, it was an eternity. Charlie had dumped the car and vanished. She had used their own tactics, their own equipment, against them. She had evaporated into the humid Louisiana air like a ghost, standing by the desolate lakeshore, with the wail of distant sirens and the angry chop of the water. Derek felt a profound sense of dread. Charlie wasn't just running. She was thinking, planning, and adapting. This wasn't a flight of passion anymore. This was a calculated game of survival, and the detective they had trained was now using all her skills to become the one suspect they might never catch. While the NOPD chased a ghost to Lake Pontchartrain, the real Charlie Washington was miles away, deep in the murky heart of the Atchafalaya Basin. She was in a place that didn't exist on any official map, a place she had discovered years ago during a missing persons case that had led her into the labyrinthine waterways of the bayou. It was a small, dilapidated fishing shack on stilts, accessible only by a shallow draft boat, hidden by a thick canopy of cypress trees draped in Spanish moss. It was her sanctuary, her ace in the hole, and now it was her prison. She'd made her way here through a series of calculated moves. After abandoning the NOPD sedan, she'd stolen a beat-up pickup truck with the keys left in the ignition, a crime of opportunity, and driven west, away from the main search area. She'd then used a hidden stash of cash to buy a small, rusted John boat from a grizzled old fisherman who asked no questions, his face as weathered and unreadable as the cypress knees sticking out of the water. Now, sitting on the shack's rickety porch, the sounds of the manhunt were replaced by the symphony of the swamp, the buzzing of insects, the guttural call of a bullfrog, the splash of some unseen creature in the black water below. The tattered remains of her wedding dress lay in a heap in the corner, a ghostly reminder of the life that had imploded just hours ago. She was now dressed in a spare set of practical clothes, cargo pants, and a dark t-shirt that she'd kept stashed here. She was a detective again, albeit one on the wrong side of the law. As darkness fell, enveloping the bayou in an inky blackness, the adrenaline that had fueled her escape began to fade, replaced by the crushing weight of her actions. The image of Adam falling, the crimson stain spreading across his chest, was seared into her mind. She hadn't meant to kill him. Or had she? In that white-hot moment of rage, what had been her true intent? The question haunted her. Her mind, seeking refuge from the horror of the present, drifted back into the past, re-examining her relationship with Adam through the cold, clear lens of betrayal. The flashbacks came in waves, each one a clue she had missed, a red flag she had willfully ignored. She remembered a dinner with a potential investor for Adam's company. Adam had introduced her proudly. "This is Charlotte," he'd said. "She's a detective with the NOPD, one of the best." At the time, she'd felt a surge of pride. Now, she saw the truth. He wasn't showing her off. He was using her. Her badge, her reputation for integrity, was a valuable asset, a silent co-signer for his increasingly risky business ventures. She was his shield, his character witness. Another memory surfaced. A late-night argument about money. He'd been unusually stressed, talking about a loan that was about to be called in. He'd asked her to co-sign a new line of credit. "It's just a formality, honey," he'd said, his hand stroking her hair. "With your stable city salary and spotless record, the bank will approve it in a heartbeat. It'll save the company." She had refused, a rare moment where her professional caution overrode her personal feelings. The anger that had flashed in his eyes, though quickly hidden, was something she now understood. She hadn't just been his fiancé, she was part of his financial recovery plan. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The late nights weren't just with Amara, they were with creditors. The secret phone calls weren't just to his mistress, they were to loan sharks. He was drowning in debt, his family's old money prestige, a hollow facade. The marriage wasn't a union of love, it was a merger, a desperate gambit to secure his future by shackling it to hers. Amara and her baby weren't just a betrayal, they were another complication in his web of lies, another fire he was trying to put out. A single hot tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. It wasn't a tear for the love she had lost, because that love had never been real. It was a tear of rage at her own blindness. He hadn't just cheated on her. He had systematically deceived, manipulated, and tried to exploit her. Suddenly, a sound cut through the night, different from the natural noises of the swamp. It was the faint, distant thrum of a motor, an airboat, far off but getting closer. Her head snapped up, every nerve ending on fire. They'd found her. It was impossible. No one knew about this place. Had she been followed? Had the old fisherman talked? Then she saw it, a thin wisp of smoke curling up from the small, makeshift fire pit she had lit an hour ago to keep the mosquitoes at bay. A rookie mistake. In her grief and anger, she had forgotten the most basic rule of evasion. Leave no trace. The tiny column of smoke was a beacon in the vast, dark wilderness. The thrum of the engine grew louder, closer. A searchlight beam sliced through the darkness, sweeping across the water and trees, a relentless, probing eye. They were hunting her, and her sanctuary had just become a trap. The ghost of the bayou was about to be cornered. Back at the makeshift command post, set up on the edge of the Atchafalaya, Captain Foster stared at a topographical map of the basin. It was a chaotic mess of green and blue, a search grid that was nearly impossible to navigate. The report of smoke had given them a general area, but the swamp was a labyrinth. Every channel looked the same, every island of trees a potential hiding spot. They could search for weeks and find nothing. "The terrain's too dense for aerial thermal imaging, and the water is messing with our best equipment," a SWAT commander reported, his frustration evident. "We need something that can cut through the noise." Derek, who had been studying the same map, looked up at Foster. "Captain," he said, his voice firm, "it's time. Call in the K-9. There was a moment of hesitation. Using a K-9 unit to hunt one of their own felt like the ultimate betrayal. But they were out of options. Charlie was a fugitive, armed and considered dangerous. They had to bring her in. "Make the call," Foster ordered grimly. An hour later, a new player arrived on the scene. He wasn't a cop in tactical gear, but a magnificent German shepherd, his black and tan coat sleek under the portable floodlights. His name was Shadow, and he was the best scent-tracking dog in the state. His handler, a quiet, intense deputy named Cormier, led him from the truck. Shadow was all business, his intelligent eyes scanning the area, his nose already twitching, sampling the million different scents in the humid air. "What have you got for him?" Cormier asked, his voice a low Cajun drawl. Derek produced a sealed evidence bag. Inside was the satin heel Charlie had kicked off in the French Quarter. It was their best hope, a pure, uncontaminated scent article. Cormier opened the bag and let Shadow take a long, deep sniff. The dog's entire demeanor changed. He went from a calm observer to a focused hunter. His tail stiffened, his body went taut. He had the scent. "He's got her," Cormier said simply. "Let's go." They set off in a shallow draft airboat, the massive fan at the back roaring to life and propelling them across the black water. Shadow stood at the bow, a silent, noble silhouette against the sweeping beam of the searchlight. He was their compass, their guide through this disorienting world. He'd lift his nose to the wind, then point it decisively down a narrow, nearly invisible channel between two cypress groves. Cormier would follow without question. The dog knew the way. The tension on the boat was thick enough to cut with a knife. The SWAT team members sat with their rifles at the ready, their faces grim. Derek felt a knot of dread in his stomach. He was leading a hunting party to find his partner, guided by a dog trained to find the lost and the hiding. The irony was a bitter pill. After nearly an hour of winding through the maze, Shadow suddenly became agitated. He let out a low whine and began to pace at the bow, his nose pointing insistently towards a dense thicket on a small island. "He's got something strong here," Cormier said, cutting the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of insects. "She's close, or she was, very recently." The team disembarked, their boots sinking into the soft mud. Shadow, on a long leash, pulled Cormier forward, past the smoldering embers of the fire pit Charlie had abandoned. He ignored the shack on stilts, his instincts telling him the primary scent trail was elsewhere. He led them to the base of an ancient gnarled cypress tree, its roots like massive twisted fingers digging into the earth. Shadow stopped dead, his nose pressed against a patch of disturbed mud. He began to dig frantically with his front paws, letting out a series of sharp, excited barks. "What is it, boy?" Cormier urged, kneeling beside him. Derek and a SWAT officer rushed over with flashlights. They illuminated the spot where Shadow was digging. Buried just a few inches beneath the wet soil and leaf litter was a plastic-wrapped object. Carefully, using a pair of evidence tweezers, Derek worked it free. It was a small, cheap burner phone. He wiped the mud from its screen. It was off, its battery likely dead. But it wasn't Charlie's. He knew her personal phone, her department-issued phone. This was something else, a throwaway, a ghost phone. A sudden, chilling realization washed over Derek. Charlie hadn't just been hiding. She'd been working. In the chaos of the wedding, in the blur of the shooting and the escape, she must have lifted this from Adam's pocket. She hadn't fled the scene as a panicked criminal. She'd secured the single most important piece of evidence before she ran. This phone wasn't just a clue to Adam's secret life. It was Charlie's justification, her defense, her entire case, wrapped in a muddy piece of plastic. And she had left it here for them to find. It was a message, a gamble, a testament from a detective who knew that even if she lost her freedom, the truth still had to come out. Shadow, with his incredible nose, hadn't just scented betrayal. He had uncovered its source. The discovery of the burner phone changed the dynamic of the hunt. It was no longer a simple pursuit of a fugitive. It was a complex negotiation with a cornered colleague. They now knew Charlie was not just a desperate woman on the run, but a methodical detective who had left them a trail of breadcrumbs. The SWAT team, now understanding the nuance of the situation, established a perimeter around the small island. They didn't storm the shack. Instead, they waited, their positions concealed behind the thick cypress trees, their professionalism tempered by a new, reluctant respect for their target. The sun began to rise, painting the black water in shades of gray and purple. The bayou slowly came to life, but the air around the shack remained thick with a tense, unnatural silence. Captain Foster's voice came crackling over Derek's radio. "What's your play, Williams? She trusts you more than anyone. You're the primary contact." Derek took a deep breath, the heavy, humid air filling his lungs. He put on a ballistic vest, not because he thought Charlie would shoot him, but because protocol demanded it. He walked to the edge of the clearing, a megaphone in his hand, feeling the weight of every eye, both seen and unseen, upon him. "Charlie!" he called out, his voice echoing eerily across the water. "It's Derek! We found the phone, Charlie. We found it." There was no response from the dark, silent shack, only the drip of morning dew from the Spanish moss. "I know what you did," he continued, his voice softer, more personal now. "You were building a case. You left it for us, for me. Let me help you, partner. Let us help you." He waited. The silence stretched, taut as a wire. He could feel her in there, listening, weighing her options, her brilliant, tormented mind working through every possible angle. "I know about the Delacroix." Derek's voice rose with passion. "I know what they are, what they did to you. Don't let them win by letting you rot out here. You come out, you tell your story. I will personally walk this evidence into the DA's office. I swear to you, Charlie, they will not bury this." Suddenly, a voice, hoarse and strained, came from the shack's darkened doorway. "How do I know you're not just saying that, Derek? How do I know they won't just lose that phone in an evidence locker?" It was her. He could see her silhouette now, a shadow within a shadow. She was still in control, still a detective. "Because we're partners," he said, the words catching in his throat. "Because for 5 years, you've had my back on every call, in every dark alley. Now let me have yours. I give you my word. That phone will be the first thing the world sees." He could see her consider this. It was an incredible risk for her to take. The NOPD was a political machine, and the Delacroix family owned half the politicians in the state. Her evidence, her only real defense, could easily be made to disappear. "One more condition," her voice came again, stronger this time. "Amara Jones, the pregnant woman. She's a victim in this too. I want a protection detail on her, 24/7. The Delacroix will try to silence her. You know they will." Derek was stunned, as even now, cornered, her life in ruins, she was thinking about protecting someone else. She was still a cop, down to her very soul. "You have my word, Charlie," Derek said, his voice thick with emotion. "Full protective detail for her and her child. I'll assign it myself." There was a long pause. He could hear the faint sound of a sob from within the shack, a single, heartbreaking crack in her iron composure. Then the door creaked open further. Charlie stepped out into the hazy morning light. She was gaunt, her face streaked with mud and tears, her eyes hollowed out from lack of sleep and an excess of grief. But she stood tall, her shoulders back, her gaze meeting his without flinching. She was unarmed. Her hands were empty and open at her sides. She took a slow, deliberate step off the porch, her bare feet sinking into the soft mud. She walked towards him, crossing the invisible line between fugitive and prisoner. The standoff was over. The hunt had ended. But for Detective Charlotte Washington, the longest and most difficult part of her journey was just beginning. She had surrendered her body, but she had done so only after ensuring that the truth, in all its ugly glory, had a fighting chance to see the light of day. The surrender was a quiet, somber affair. There was no shouting, no struggle. As Derek gently placed the handcuffs on his partner's wrists, the cold click of the steel felt less like a victory and more like a funeral rite for a life and a career that were now over. While Charlie was being processed in a secure facility, the contents of the burner phone were being ripped open by the NOPD's Digital Forensics Unit, under Derek's direct and unwavering supervision. It was a Pandora's box of deceit. The phone contained hundreds of text messages between Adam and Amara, a complete, damning timeline of their relationship. But it was far more than a simple story of infidelity. The texts, combined with financial data forensics pulled from Adam's company's servers, painted a picture of a man not just in love with 2 women, but in a desperate spiraling crisis. The Delacroix shipping empire was a hollow shell, rotting from the inside out with bad investments and staggering debt. A fact Adam had successfully hidden from his family and the world. He had met Amara, a smart, ambitious paralegal, while trying to secure a shady, high-interest loan. Their affair had been passionate, but for Adam, it was also transactional. He saw in her a potential escape from the suffocating expectations of his family. His plan, as revealed in the texts, was monstrous in its cold calculation. He would marry Charlie first. The marriage to a decorated, financially stable NOPD detective would bolster his public image and give him access to her credit and reputation, allowing him to secure the last-ditch loans he needed to stave off bankruptcy. He had no intention of staying with her. The texts to Amara were filled with promises. "Just a few more months, baby. Once the business is stable, I'll leave the cop. We'll take our son and go somewhere they can't find us." She's just a means to an end. Charlie had never been the prize. She was the stepping stone. The betrayal was deeper and more insidious than anyone could have imagined. He hadn't just lied about his love, he had weaponized it. He had targeted a black woman with a sterling reputation, believing her to be both a perfect shield and, ultimately, more disposable in the eyes of his high society world. His racism wasn't just an attitude, it was a core component of his strategy. At University Medical Center, Adam Delacroix survived the surgery. The 380 slug had missed his heart by less than an inch, but it had shattered his spine. He would live, but he would never walk again. The handsome, charismatic heir was now a paraplegic, confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. In a hospital room down the hall, under the 24/7 protection Derek had promised, Amara Jones told her story. She spoke with a quiet dignity, her narrative perfectly corroborating the evidence on the phone. She hadn't come to the wedding for revenge. She had come because Adam had broken his final promise, to tell Charlie the truth himself. He was a coward, she told Derek, her hand never leaving her belly. He was going to let that good woman marry him, knowing it was all a lie. I couldn't let that happen. I thought if she knew the truth, she would just walk away. I never imagined. Her voice broke, and she began to weep for the catastrophe that had engulfed them all. The most damning evidence came from a series of deleted voicemails forensics managed to recover from the burner phone's memory card. They were from Adam to his financial fixer, recorded just 2 days before the wedding. The detective is all in. Adam's voice, smug and confident, filled the forensics lab. She's so grateful to be marrying up that she doesn't see a thing. The second that ring is on her finger, we use her credit line to leverage the new loan. We'll be in the clear by Tuesday. As for the other one, Amara, I'll deal with her and the kid after the money is secure. A problem for another day. Derek felt physically ill. He played the recording for Captain Foster, whose face hardened into granite. The gilded lie had completely unraveled. Adam Delacroix wasn't a victim of a jealous rage. He was a predator who had been stopped by his prey. Charlie hadn't snapped because a man had cheated on her. She had been systematically targeted, emotionally gutted, and racially denigrated until the pressure became unbearable. The shooting was not the beginning of the crime. It was the horrific, violent end to a long and calculated conspiracy of fraud and emotional abuse. The question was no longer simply what Charlie did, but why, and whether any jury in the world could fail to understand. The trial of Detective Charlotte Washington was a media circus. It became a flashpoint for every simmering tension in America: race, class, gender, and the justice system itself. The Delacroix family hired a team of high-powered celebrity lawyers who painted Adam as the tragic victim, a charming rogue whose minor indiscretions were met with savage, ghetto-bred violence. They portrayed Charlie as a calculating, cold-blooded killer who used her police training to execute her lover in a fit of jealousy. But they had not counted on Derek Williams, or Amara Jones, or the mountain of digital evidence from the burner phone. Derek took the stand, not just as a fellow officer, but as a character witness and an expert on the evidence. He calmly and methodically laid out the timeline of deceit, playing the recovered voicemails for the stunned courtroom. Adam's own smug voice, describing Charlie as a means to an end, echoed through the chamber, sucking the air out of the room and torpedoing the defense's narrative. Amara Jones, poised and resolute, took the stand next. She didn't cast blame. She simply told her truth, her story of a man who promised her a family while actively building a fraudulent life with another woman. Her quiet dignity was more powerful than any legal theatrics. The prosecution, faced with overwhelming evidence of extreme emotional disturbance and provocation, saw their first-degree murder charge begin to crumble. Charlie's defense team argued passionately that this was not a premeditated act of murder, but the tragic, foreseeable result of a campaign of psychological torture and racist dehumanization. The shooting, they argued, was a moment of temporary insanity, a human mind breaking under an inhuman amount of pressure. Charlie took the stand in her own defense. Dressed in a simple prison jumpsuit, she spoke without artifice or excuse. She recounted the lies, the manipulation, and the final venomous words from Eleanor Delacroix. She looked the jury in the eye. "I am a police officer," she said, her voice steady but filled with a profound sadness. "I believe in the law. I have dedicated my life to it. What I did was wrong. It was a violation of everything I stand for. I took the law into my own hands, and there is no excuse for that. But I ask you to understand that on that day, at that altar, I was not just a bride who had been cheated on. I was a woman who discovered her entire life, her love, and her identity had been a carefully constructed lie, designed to exploit and discard her. In that moment, the detective in me died, and something else took over." In the end, the jury was swayed. They found her not guilty of murder, but guilty of the lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter. The verdict was a compromise, a recognition of both her crime and the extreme provocation that led to it. Charlie was sentenced to 15 years in the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women. The years passed. The media storm faded. Adam Delacroix lived out his days as a bitter paraplegic, his family's fortune eventually collapsing under the weight of his debts and legal fees. Amara Jones gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She did not name him Thomas. She named him Isaac, and with the help of a victims' compensation fund Derek had helped her secure, she moved to another state to build a new life, far from the shadows of New Orleans. One sweltering afternoon, years into her sentence, Charlie sat in the prison library reading a letter from Keisha. It was filled with news of the outside world, of friends and life moving on. She looked out the barred window at the small patch of blue sky visible above the concrete walls. The truth had come out. Adam's conspiracy was exposed, his family's name ruined. In a way, justice had been served, but it was a hollow victory. The truth had not set her free. It had simply landed her in a different kind of cage. She finally understood the devastating lesson of her own story. Her greatest enemy on that sun-drenched wedding day hadn't been Adam Delacroix or his venomous mother. It had been the uncontrollable rage inside her. They had built the bomb, but she was the one who had chosen to light the fuse. The truth can be a powerful weapon, but rage, no matter how righteous, is a fire that consumes everything in its path, including the person who wields it. Her fight for justice had cost her her freedom, her career, and a decade of her life. The ultimate battle, she now knew, was not against those who hurt you, but against the darkness they ignite within your own soul. And that was a sentence she would have to serve long after she walked out of the prison gates.